City Hall in the city of Elizabeth. Thank you for coming, and I'm pleased to be joined by Miss Judy Blume, who is a resident and grew up here in the city of Elizabeth. We still like to call her a resident here. But Judy, welcome to the City Hall in Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We really want to thank her for being here today, as she's been the #1 New York Times best-selling author of Summer Sisters, as well as Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. That's one I've heard an awful lot about in the last couple of days. Most remarkable, this afternoon we've had the privilege of discussing her latest novel titled In the Unlikely Event, which is already on the must-read list for the summer. And please join me in welcoming Miss Judy Blume to the city.
Thank you.
So I had the good fortune of finishing the book last night. Judy sent me an advance copy.
No spoilers.
No spoilers. But Judy, why don't we start from the beginning and talk about your life here in the city of Elizabeth, where you grew up and how you went to school, where you were born. Why don't you kick it off?
So my parents, this is really weird. Do you hear yourself?
But it's pretty easy.
This thing.
Yeah.
Do you?
Everybody else can hear it.
Really?
Yeah, it's perfect.
It sounds so odd to me. Anyway, my parents were born and raised in Elizabeth. They met at Baton High School. They graduated from Baton when it was still co-ed. You guys don't even know that it was, anyway. And my father was a young dentist. He started a dental practice here with his two brothers, also all born and raised in Elizabeth, and had 2 children. And I lived in Elizabeth in the same house from age 2 to 19, went to school 21, and and Hamilton Junior High. I just met a guy who went to Hamilton. I can still sing all the old songs. We could do that. And then to Baton, graduated from Baton. And so I was a kid in 8th grade in the winter of 51, 52. And
You lived a short time in Miami Beach.
oh,
We don't want to talk about those years?
No, those were very interesting years.
Okay.
But that was because my brother got sick, and in those days, the doctor said, if you can possibly afford to do this, take the kids and live in Miami Beach so he won't be sick. Of course, we were fine, but that's what they said.
What a way to get to Miami, huh? So tell us about your childhood, Judy, in the city of Elizabeth. What rings out?
Everything.
Some of your favorites.
I remember everything. So I would be sitting here doing an autobiography for you. Walking to school down Shelley Avenue. I was terrified of dogs in those days, and I walked with my friend Barry Neidick, and he was supposed to protect me from the dogs. I like dogs now.
Did he protect you?
Well, nobody bit me. Nobody ate me. And, I just remember everything from going to buy sweet corn, going to Green Lane Farm, I think we called it. Now Kane College is there.
And the president's here.
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And so it's really interesting that I have such a good memory for my childhood, for everything. And yet, I lived through the winter of 1951-52. And I must have put it somewhere so deep inside that in a career of writing 40, I don't know how many years, well over 40 years, it never, ever occurred to me that I had a story that I needed and wanted to tell.
So when did you find your passion for writing? Was it at such an early age in the city of Elizabeth, or did it develop
Well, I
later?
used to bounce. Do you remember Spalding balls, pink rubber Spalding balls? I know, my friend from junior high does. And I used to bounce that pink Spalding ball against the side of my red brick house and make up stories. I always had stories inside my head, but I never told anybody because
So were they poems or short stories?
No poems. They were melodramas. I was 9 years old and I was heavy into drama, the drama of life. But I never told anybody because I thought if I did, they would think that is one really weird kid, which I probably was, but I pretended really well that I wasn't.
Okay.
Is that-
So you've expressed yourself extremely well through the years, especially the young women that I've met who grew up on your books. And so expressing yourself through the written word, and we're going to get to the unlikely event, is a real passion. And was it developed in the schools in the city of Elizabeth, or did you kind of hone those skills later in life?
I liked school. I always liked school. But in those days, creative writing was not a thing, really. I don't ever remember doing any creative writing. If we were assigned to write something, I enjoyed it. But I'll tell you a little secret about my book reports, because in 6th grade we had to do book reports, and I was already reading the books at the side of the fireplace, flanking the fireplace in my parents' house, because there were no young adult, teenagey books then. So, I finished reading kids' books, and okay, now I'm reading these books, and there's no way I'm going to report in 6th grade on what I'm really reading. So, although I was a shy kid for a long time, I invented books, and I stood up and I reported on this invented book and author and theme and characters and everything that we were supposed to do. And I always got an A when I made it up.
Of course.
Yeah, I got an A.
Well, as probably the only person besides you and your staff who has read The Unlikely Event, I would give you an A for writing on The Unlikely Event.
Thank
and
you.
encourage everyone here to get that book as well.
I hope you're going to like it. It's so Elizabeth. It's all Elizabeth.
So was there a specific individual who inspired your career as an author, or there's somebody you looked up to, or who'd you admire?
Well, I admired a lot of people, and I looked up to a lot of people, and I knew that when I started to write, I was going to write about young people. I think because I was so young myself, inexperienced, and because my memory was so good for my own childhood, it never occurred to me not to write for a young audience. And so I read widely. I went to the public library, and I came home with armloads of books, and I put them in piles. I love these. I don't want to write like this. I want to write like this. I would fall off the sofa reading Beverly Cleary, laughing, and I said, yes, 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 this is what I want to do.
So would you encourage young ladies and others to read? I mean,
yeah.
probably a lot of young people out there who don't want to read.
I thought you were going to say, would I encourage them to write? And I was going to say, the way that you get to be a writer is you get to be a reader.
Good.
And you read, and reading is wonderful. Reading is a gift. I mean, I think one of the greatest gifts my parents gave to me is the gift of the freedom to choose my own books, to read widely. Nobody was ever afraid of what I was reading. There was no, oh my goodness, take that book away from her. They took me to movies. There were no ratings for movies. I went to movies every week. They took me to the theater in New York. They didn't care. It wasn't a Disney show. I was learning about life, and I learned about life and the lives of grown-ups by reading the books.
So were some of your characters and the subject matter based on your real life experiences?
Only once.
Only once.
Well, until this book. Yeah. Starring Sally J. Friedman is my most autobiographical book. But of course, every character. I mean, am I Margaret? Yes, I'm Margaret. I mean, right? Am I?
You can see how many people read that book by that
yeah,
little
everybody
gesture
knows
you just
about
did,
that.
right? They all read it.
So, I mean, when you write fiction, you put parts of yourself into every character. You have to love those characters, and so, of course, you take little things from this one and little things from that one, things that you see and hear, and writers are observers. So
in The Unlikely Event, which is your latest novel, the book and why you decided to prominently feature such a historic time in our city. You said earlier that it was actually some memories that you did not bring up.
Okay, here's what happened. I was sitting in an auditorium in Key West at the Key West Literary Seminar, something I go to every year. And on stage was a young writer. The theme of the conference that year was new voices in literature. And her name was Rachel Kushner, and now she's very famous, and she's less young, because it took me a long time to write the book. But she stood up and she was talking about stories that her mother had told her in the 50s. And that's how she wrote her book. And all I heard was in the 50s, and it was like, boing!
It was that simple, in the 50s, and the plane crashes kicked off.
It wasn't like that. It was like, oh my God, I have a story that took place in the 50s, and I have to tell this story. And suddenly, yes, it was this experience. I mean, my daughter became a commercial airline pilot, and I never told her about it. And she says, Mother, how could you not have told me this story? And it wasn't that I ever forgot it. It was, I think, that, I maybe didn't know what to do with it as a kid, and so I put it deep inside. But then the memories all came flooding back, and I knew immediately I had to tell the story, and I started what then took 5 months of research and 5 years of writing the book.
5 years
I was
to write
so young when I started writing this book. Oh, God.
So when you first pitched the idea for this book, and you had this process and thought, was there an immediate interest, or did you have to sell this concept?
No, we don't work that way
You don't work
in
that way.
fiction.
Tell us about that.
Well, my editor, Carol Barron, is sitting right there in the first row. And
She told me you're the easiest author to edit, is what she told me.
well, she's just saying that.
She's
But
just
anyway,
saying
I am easy because I like to revise. But we had breakfast. We called them our power breakfasts. And we would meet every time I was in New York, and I would tell her stories. Carol, listen to this. Carol, listen to this. And she knew that I was writing this book. And she was great because I wouldn't show her a word, but I would tell her stories. And it wasn't until a year ago, almost a year ago now, that I finally sent her the manuscript for this book. It was either burn it or send it, and my husband was like, why don't you send it? You can always burn it. So.
Well, we're thrilled you didn't burn it.
Well, I am now. I'm glad too. But then,
So in the book, it talks about the meeting that occurred when Newark Airport was closed down.
I can't believe it's in this. It's in
where
this
this
room.
meeting was held.
Over
in
1,000
1952.
people.
Right.
Over 1,000 people after the second crash came to a meeting here, a very angry meeting.
We've had those.
Where they demanded the closing of Newark Airport, which did not happen.
It happened for a couple of, not to the third one.
Not till after the third one, yes. And it was a really hot meeting. I mean,
Were there any other cities affected like ours with 3 crashes in such a short period of time? Did your research ever find that?
Never. I mean, how could that be? It's even now, when I walk back around the sites of the crashes, I was there with a TV crew a few weeks ago, and I was like thinking inside, how is this possible? Maybe the boys in 8th grade were right. It was really flying saucers and aliens and zombies, because that's what they thought. Do you remember that?
When you read the book and you talk about all the boys, they had this specific information that they were going to be taken away and taken over by but then there was one line in the book and talked about maybe they only take dead children instead of live kids, and we'd be okay.
Well, zombies, yeah.
Zombies, right?
And it's the commies doing it. It's got to be the commies. And everybody was looking for a reason, because it's so inexplicable. I mean, that this could possibly happen.
So are
And
the characters in the book, Judy, based on anybody you know, or is...
only one, in the fictional part of the book,
Right.
which is all the families and the people telling the stories, that's all fiction. But the dentist, Dr. O, is very much inspired by my father, who was a dentist. And I knew that my father was called in to identify the victims by their dental records. I knew that. but we never talked about it at home because we never talked about anything of real importance.
Because in my reading...
Because we were kids, and in those days, in the early 50s, it was, don't tell the kids. Don't tell the kids.
So how did you find out about the crashes?
Oh, I knew about the crashes. I mean, I was in the car on the Sunday afternoon with my parents and my girlfriend. We were going out to dinner and to a movie or something. It was a Sunday afternoon, a terrible, freezing cold Sunday afternoon. The radio must have been on in the car because I remember the bulletin interrupting the show and saying that a plane had just crashed into the Elizabeth River.
Because when I read the book, and I read all the characters in the book, I can associate all of those characters with someone in the city of Elizabeth, maybe not by name, but there is someone who lived that life in the city of Elizabeth in the 50s, whether it be the young boy in the Janet Memorial Home, or Miri Ammerman, or her brother, the reporter. There's someone who lived that life. Her uncle, I'm sorry, the reporter. There's someone who lived that life.
Of course. Well, I mean, I remember, people say, oh, you did so much research about what songs they were listening to in the 50s, and, what the girls wore and all of that. And I'm thinking to myself, I didn't have to research that stuff. I remembered all of that stuff. I had to research the crashes and, all of the newspaper stories, and so many stories inspired me to make fictional characters in the book. There was a woman on the ground, reported in the paper, who survived the third crash and said, please, girlie, loosen my girdle. I can't breathe. And that became a moment in the book. So there are so many moments.
That was a moment in the book that made me pause, because I could see someone helping that lady doing that, especially in our city. And that's what was special about that part of the book.
Yeah.
So did you visit any of the sites at the time, or did you see this, or
You
know
know,
anybody who was directly impacted?
I never visited any of the sites, which I find very strange because I was a really curious, imaginative kid. And the only thing I can think of is that my mother made sure that I never saw any of the sites. I don't know. My brother did. He was 4 years older than me.
And did you go to Newark Airport all the time, or now, or?
Well, we
can't
used to
envision
go.
the runways.
We used to go to Newark Airport for fun, to watch the planes coming and going. I mean, that was like a Sunday afternoon fun thing to do.
Because Terminal A is in Elizabeth, and the runways, based on your research, clearly showed Newark Airport, when it reopened, directed all of the planes away from the city of Elizabeth.
They never have come over again, right?
No, they have not.
No.
Well, we had a fight with them recently up to the Supreme Court about their routes and when they turn over the city. It used to have to be 2.5 miles, and then they shortened it to 2.25 miles.
And who won?
They won. It's tough to beat the government.
It's tough.
It's tough.
Very tough.
So flying was much different in the 50s than it is now, as you know.
Totally different.
What did you think of flying in the 50s? When did you first fly?
I didn't take my first plane, and people assume that because I wrote this book and lived through this, I must be terrified of flying. I'm not. My sinuses are, but I'm not. And I couldn't wait to fly. It was such a romantic idea then. You dressed up to fly, and I went to, my first flight was
You could smoke on planes back then.
Yeah, but I didn't smoke, and I don't like smoke, so I
Neither
don't
do
know what it is. But my father smoked a lot. But my first, I was 17, and I went to my brother's wedding in Houston. And we flew on a Constellation, and the pilot or co-pilot or stewardess, as we call them, then gave me wings to wear. I was very excited. Even I was 17, but I was like a little kid,
So you flew 2 years after this happened then?
A couple of years after. But stranger than that, I think, is the fact that when I was a senior in high school, my father took me to Boston to interview at Boston University. And it was winter, and it was a terrible day, and on the way home, it was snowing. There was a snowstorm. It was very hard, and our flight back was canceled. And my father, just like, there's a scene like this in the book, my father said to me, well, lucky us, I scored 2 tickets on a plane home. And I was with my daddy, and I adored him, and I was never frightened, and I knew nothing bad could ever happen to me when I was with him. He took me home on a non-sked. I mean, the same...
You make that as a big deal in your book, the non-sked, and don't ever take me on a non-sked.
Well,
that one part
Steve, his father, Dr. O, takes Steve back from interviewing on a non-sked and says, don't ever tell your mother. And my father said to me, don't ever tell Mommy that I brought you home on a non-sked plane. I mean, not all non-skeds were bad, but, you know, it was... Times were different.
That specifically was in the book, that word strictly...
Non-sked.
Yeah, non-sked.
Yeah, it was like charters. I mean, people today don't know what that means, but it was like charter flights, and they were they could be iffy.
So did you talk with the airport or safety officials regarding any of your research on this book? Or?
You know, I saw that question on a list, and I didn't. But let me ask Henry Ammerman in the front row. Hank, did we talk to... He's not mic'd, but this is my husband, George Cooper, who plays the role of Henry Ammerman in the book. Because he helped me very much with...
We did talk to current officials, but we did all the research on the official government reports and other stuff about the crashes, and we did look into that.
Okay.
We talked a lot to my daughter, who was the pilot.
A lot of research.
We were very serious about it, yeah.
So, what do you remember? Did you research reactions throughout the community? I mean, because there's a lot of people that called us.
I know.
When this book was announced in February.
Know.
And
I wish I had known in advance. What I did was, you know, I read every newspaper story, and because there was no TV news coverage then, everything was up to the reporters and the news photographers to paint the picture for us. I think, frankly, at 14, I probably didn't read the papers, so I didn't know all that much, but I knew that it had happened and it was happening, and I hung out with the smart girls who said it's sabotage, and that was such a sexy word. It was like, it's sabotage. But who is out to get us? Because we figured it was somebody out to get the kids. I mean,
in your book, you mentioned that word sabotage, and you said, somebody said, what does that word mean, or something in the book?
And they all scrambled, and they go to the dictionary. Right.
Which is pretty good.
But Vic there, right, remembers all this stuff from being in Hamilton, and it was to the kids as if somebody was out to get the kids, because 2 blocks from Hamilton and almost into the window of Baton High, just missing St. Mary's, and then into the playing field of Janet Memorial. I mean, it's kids, right? But the question was, why the kids of Elizabeth? What was so special about us that they wanted to get us?
The communists were after us.
Who knows who was after us? But so it was both terrifying, I think, and almost exciting, wasn't it? I mean, because we had to find a way that we could deal with this. And so being excited about it was better than, hiding under the table.
So Judy, what did you learn about the emergency services in your research? I mean, there's a fireman here who actually responded.
Charles
Swody.
Charles Swody.
Responded to all
stand
three.
up, Charles Swody, and wave. Can you do that? A firefighter who fought the blazes at all 3 crashes. And when I heard from his daughter that she would bring him tonight, I was so touched. Thank you. And is Bob Callio here? Are you here, Bob Callio? Is he
Bob
here?
There he is.
Hey, hi. He was at Hamilton. You were in 9th grade, right, when I was in 8th grade? Were you in 9th grade during the crashes?
9th grade.
9th grade. 9th grade. He was at Janet. He was there.
We're going to give you a microphone.
Yes.
And
You were an older boy. And you lived at Janet.
I lived at Janet, and we remember that night very well. It was a moonlit night, and 25 minutes after 12, when the plane came down and crashed into our football field. We had a regulation-sized football field, and when we sounded the fire alarm, everybody ran out. We ran down the back steps, and we went to the left part of the field where we thought there were people or bodies laying. That turned out to be the luggage department, because the plane, when it crashed, the tail hit the Meltzer Apartments, which was just to the left of Janet, killing the McGee family on the 3rd floor. And then the plane broke apart, and the tail section actually slid right across Westminster Avenue. And fortunately, we did go to the what we thought was the people laying on the ground, because the plane exploded after we had gone to that portion. And then we went up to where the fire was, and there were survivors that walked out of the tail section of the plane, people that were burnt. And we started to take them into Janet and triaged them in there, and took them off to I went to Elizabeth General with a lady, Priscilla DeFure. I don't know if you probably read about her in the paper. She was on her honeymoon with her husband, and
That's in the book.
he died and she survived, and she was a beautiful lady, 25 years old, and burns all over her legs, and so it was some night, and I can't wait to read the book.
So, on that note, we're going to show a brief video, Judy, about
Okay.
some of the footage that we've.
You mean
Research.
terrible footage?
I don't
you
know,
mean
is it
awful,
terrible footage?
scary footage?
Here it is.
Do we want to see that? The book is uplifting, guys, by the way.
book
I
is
know it's
uplifting.
terrible,
The book is
but
uplifting.
ultimately it's about getting through it, and life goes on, and you go on, and you fall in love, and you make a life for yourself, and no matter how many terrible things happen, life goes on.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that as soon as we see some of these clips.
Oh, okay.